Okay, dear ones, so glad that you are here. And with that, I would like to welcome you to our 157th online gathering for congregational leaders across the country. This weekly gathering is called Courageous Leadership, and it's sponsored by ELCA's coaching ministry. I'm Jill Beverlin. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the program manager for this ministry and one of your facilitators today. So as we begin, I also want to name our ministry's commitment to the truth and healing movement in the ELCA. And as such, I have made it a practice to offer a land acknowledgement as we start our courageous leadership gatherings. As I read my land acknowledgement, Jason will put into the chat a link to the place where you can learn more about the truth and healing movement in the ELCA, and also find information about the Native peoples that have called where you currently live home. I also invite you to share in the chat your own land acknowledgement if you know that information today. This is an opportunity to practice courage in speaking the truth about our relationship with our Native Indigenous siblings and our commitment to the work of truth and healing. So friends, today I am back in my home office, and because of that, I get to say that my home is located on the Fox River in Appleton, Wisconsin. This area is the ancestral territory of 5 nations of Native Indigenous peoples: the Menominee tribe, the Ho-Chunk Winnebago tribe, the Potawatomi tribe, the Oneida tribe, and the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohicans and the Brothertown community. I honor and respect the diverse Indigenous peoples connected to this territory on which I live. And as we step into our time today, I also encourage us to remember that we are seeking to create a safer and braver space in these gatherings for you to bring the truth of who you are and how you are doing. These conversations are meant to be an intentional step to live more fully into God's dream for us as the body of Christ. Okay, friends, so our topic for today is preparing for what's to come alongside the upcoming presidential election in 2024. Do you remember how it felt back in 2016 leading up to November, and then the shock of the results? And also, who could forget 2020, along with COVID, the politically divisive campaign, and everything that went with that had many of our faith leaders scrambling for emotional footing and a sense of safety. So I'm curious right now in this space, how many of you are already feeling a sense of dread when we think about what the climate will be like in our congregations a year from now? Like, imagine it. So with this as a backdrop, I am so pleased to welcome into our speaking space someone who is not a stranger. He is a dear friend of ours, the Reverend David Hively. So here are some things that David says about himself. He is never bored. He balances the roles of husband, father, pastor, and coach with grace and purpose. At the heart of David's calling is his role as pastor, where he passionately serves the community of Christ Lutheran Church in Monroe, Michigan. He also serves as the director of coaching in the Southeast Michigan Synod and as a part-time ELCA Coaching Support Team participant. He focuses on active status, data collection and analytics, and leveraging technology to advance the church's mission. So like each of you, we are learning as we go, and we are excited to hear David's presentation. So with that, David, welcome to the speaking space, and thank you for hosting last week while Jason and I were both traveling. And when Jason and I learned that Zoom doesn't like it when we are trying to log on when we're on the road, we almost got ourselves shut down. So David, thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely. It's a real pleasure to be here. I have found these weekly gatherings to be so meaningful and impactful for me and for my ministry. I'm grateful to be able to have a chance to be a part of the conversation that we're having together. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And I'm going to ask Jason and Jill, as you see people mention things in the chat that are, just go ahead and name those things off, because otherwise I may not see them. I want to tell you just up front that I am trying to figure this out right alongside you. I serve in a politically diverse congregation. My congressional delegation is bipartisan. And like most of you, I suspect that my family gatherings have been a little dicey these last few years. My hope for us today is that this time that we have together will show you some landmarks that we can watch for together as we try to do this work together. One of the questions that I've been asking myself and that I've been asking the leaders in my congregation is, what kind of community do we want to be a year from today? What do we want to be able to say about our congregation in 2024? What steps can we take that might lead us towards God's preferred future for us, for our congregation, and for our community? It's easy, I think, to imagine a future where your preferred political party holds absolute power and is either ushering in the political change that you've longed for, or maybe it's holding that change at bay. And in this imagined reality, though, the problem is that there are going to be people in your country, in your community, and in your congregation who are grieving that, who feel that they're now on the margins and wonder when their turn for a win might come. And honestly, even if the day comes when, the day never comes when your political party or ideology wins, whatever that means, as people of faith, we're all anticipating a day when we're united together in one unified heavenly reign. Which means that those people, the ones with their yard signs and their slogans and their naive and misguided opinions, they're going to be there too. I think when we deal with matters of political persuasion, it can be tempting to say, can't we all just get along and sort of paper over the differences that are between us? But I don't think that's what we're after here, because that's just sort of like masking language. It makes me always think of the couple that says, well, I know that our relationship isn't great right now, but we'll go on vacation for 2 weeks and we'll come back and everything will be fine. The other thing that we tend to do in churches is we might say things like, this is just the kind of thing we should stay neutral on, or we need to keep things professional here. Of course, the problem with that is that that's the kind of language that gets used by folks in the cultural majority to silence the voices of people for whom the system is not working well. It signals that our comfort is more important than the work of true unity or of reconciliation. If we want to have authentic, meaningful relationships with one another, it's not going to be a moral free-for-all. If you think about the most important relationships in your life, those close friendships, those long-lasting friendships, they're the kind of relationships where somebody can tell you if you're out of line, if you've overstepped, or if the things that you've said or done or neglected to do have injured the relationship. Truth be told, friends, we need each other. We lean on each other. That's how we get closer to the heart of God. Or as the book of Proverbs puts it, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens the wits of another. So what kind of community do we want to be? I think that if we're going to start talking about building an inclusive community, there's no better guide for that work than Priya Parker. Her recent book, The Art of Gathering, has been one of the most impactful things I've read about what it means to build a community and to be a community. The thing that really stood out from her work was the idea that in order to truly belong to a group, you need to be able to criticize that group and not lose your place in it because of the criticism. This means that if we're going to say that people of various political persuasions are welcome in our congregations, they need to be able to speak up and not be excluded for sharing their opinions. One of the phrases that we're just going to have to put off limits is, well, if you don't like it, there's the door. As good as that might feel, it doesn't really build the community that we're hoping for. On the other side of the coin, however, we have some work by the philosopher Karl Popper. Karl Popper introduces this thing called the paradox of tolerance. And if you were in this space with us a few weeks ago, you may have remembered Jamie Brusahoff presenting. And one of the things that they said was that part of creating a safer and braver space means ruling certain kinds of behavior out of bounds. Setting up boundaries that say that we're not going to do the kinds of things that undermine the group's ability to remain together. To give you an illustration of what this might look like, imagine that you decided that one wall of the building that you're in right now was going to be dedicated towards making images of the divine. You could have part of that space be for charcoal, for paint, for airbrush or mixed media. You might even allow somebody carefully to come in with a hammer and a chisel and to carve something into the wall. But what you can't do is allow people with sledgehammers, because the only purpose of the sledgehammer is to destroy that common space and make it impossible for everyone else to share. Now, if you heard what I just said from Karl Popper and what I said from Priya Parker, you may recognize a tension. Those of you who are Lutherans in the room will be comfortable, hopefully, with that tension. To be able to belong to a group, criticize it without losing your place, and still draw some boundaries around what is and is not acceptable is part of why this work is just so darn difficult sometimes. I want to call your attention to a pretty famous sociological experiment called the Robbers Cave experiment. It comes out of a whole raft of really innovative research that came out at the end of the Second World War, as social scientists started to try to answer questions like, how on earth do groups form their identity? Why will they be so loyal to one person over another? And how do we start to break down the boundaries between different groups? It's important to know that as I tell you more about this study, this is also in the days before we had ethical review for trials that involved human subjects. So you're going to hear me talk about some things that would just absolutely never fly today, and with good reason. To do this study, they collected a group of young boys. They were largely identical in terms of their background, in terms of their socioeconomic status. The idea was that they wouldn't be bringing anything into this space that would already divide them from one another. They got them to Robbers Cave Park, and they divided them into two groups, the Eagles and the Rattlers. At first, the two groups were kept from knowing anything about each other, and they just did things within their group that were designed to build cohesion. They did group building exercises. They developed norms and ways of behaving with one another. They developed a name for their group. They created a flag, the whole thing. And then, once the groups were well established, they put them into conflict with one another. They had them compete against one another for prizes. They were competing over scarce resources. And as you can imagine, conflict arose. It started with predictable things like name calling and pushing and shoving and pointing. But the hostilities grew really quickly, to the point that the The Eagles snuck over and not only took the Rattlers' flag, but set fire to it. The Rattlers returned the favor by ransacking the Eagles' cabin and rendering it almost uninhabitable. Now our experimenters had developed the conflict between two groups. The question was, how do you start to break it down? I think most people, if you just ask them, how can we start to break down divisions between two groups of people? We assume that the key to it is just getting them to be exposed to one another. Get them in the same room, and they'll start to recognize that other people are people. And maybe if they're Christians, they'll recognize that they're people made in the image of God. The problem is that didn't really do it. In fact, it just made opportunities for more conflict. Instead, the thing that started to calm the tensions was when they constructed scenarios when the two groups had to work together on one goal that was bigger than either of them could accomplish on their own. One of the ways they did this was as they were transporting the boys on a bus, the bus broke down. And it was more bus than just one cabin of kids could push. They had to work together to push the bus and get it across the rocky ground and back to where it needed to be. The other thing they did was they told the boys that if they raised enough money, they would have a movie night that Friday night. And so the boys had to work together towards a common goal. And as they did, they actually started to help members of the other group. Eagles and Rattlers started working together because they had something bigger than them that they were working towards. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think about where we are today as a culture, as a society, and even as a congregation like the one I pastor, I recognize that there's a long way for us to go. The good news is that little changes made over time can have a really big difference. One of the things that I always come back to is this particular chart. It comes from James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. It shows really drastically what 1% daily increase or 1% daily decrease can lead to. Any of you who have ever tried to learn a new hobby, have tried to learn a new instrument or practice a new language, know that after 2 weeks, you probably don't see much of a difference. But after 6 months or a year of intentional practice, you can really actually get somewhere. Building a community that can hold together during politically divisive times, that can have important political conversations, isn't work that's going to happen overnight. But little by little, we can start to make meaningful progress. I want to introduce you to one more concept from sociology. This is the idea of a third space. Third spaces are neither work nor home. They're something different. And today, these third spaces are places where relationships are formed, but they're slowly but surely falling out of our society. Things like Boy Scouts, Rotary, bowling leagues, all these places where we would meet somebody outside of work or home are starting to drift away and leaving us without those big projects to work on together. The very things that we need to start to break down the divisions that exist among us. Friends, I submit to you that the church has a special role to play in the healing that our culture needs, because church can be a third space. It's a place where we regularly and routinely admit that we've made a thorough hash of things, that we have not done what we should do, we have not been who God would have us be. And it's a place where we're reminded that we have an identity that's bigger than our political affiliation, that we are baptized children of God. The church shows us what grace looks like in the world and invites us to be a part of a project that's bigger than any party or any political ideology. It invites us to be a part of the healing and reconciliation of the world. I want to tell you how I've seen this start to play out in my own community. In 2020, the congregation I served relaunched our food pantry. This pantry started out as literally a cabinet that people came to once or twice a month. We would have somebody come by the church. We are now on pace to serve more than 3,000 people this year, to distribute literal tons of food and become a real staple in our community. This is a project that's bigger than any one of us could take on. And I got to tell you that two of our leaders are people who I don't think they have ever voted for the same political candidate. They find each other's political beliefs reprehensible. And yet, when we have a project in front of us that's bigger than either of them can accomplish on their own, those hostilities break down and they develop into a community called and shaped and set apart for something new, for something bigger. Things like caring for our neighbors in need and working towards the healing of the world. So I've got 3 questions that I'm going to send you to breakout rooms with. Those are up on the screen, but Jason will make sure that they go out to you once you're in your breakout groups.
David, while Jason is doing that, I just want to thank you for setting the stage so beautifully for us to think about this divisiveness in fresh ways.
Yeah. I'm happy to. This was work I needed to do anyway for my own congregation, and what better commitment device than by agreeing to do a presentation on it in 6 weeks.
Exactly. I'm excited to hear. So friends, as you head to your breakout rooms, blessings on your conversation, and we will meet no later back in this space at 10 till the hour, so we have time to unpack before we have to zoom off to another coach training. So thank you, friends. Blessings on your conversation. Surprise! Welcome back to the room. We're so glad that you are here. So friends, as is our habit, we would love to hear what themes bubbled up for you, what learnings came to light, and also as you share, keeping the confidence of your small group buddies. So with that, what did you learn? What did you hear? And thank you for laughing at Jason's comment in the chat. We were just talking about, when you all come back, and it just triggered something in Jason, so he just activated, close it down.
He missed us.
Yes, and who wouldn't miss you, right?
Well, one of the things that I talked about in our group, at least, is one of the major obstacles, or whatever that the question was, is history. Meaning, this congregation that I serve, their default is we just don't talk about it, and life will be good, right? So the decisions in 2009 around sexuality, we just don't talk about it. We'll deal with it when it becomes an issue. So to bring anything up, or even to try to have conversation, is like pulling teeth. Because if anything could even smell of bringing up division, then we just don't talk about it. Because that's what good Christians do. We just don't talk about it.
We just keep shoving it under the rug.
Right.
Meanwhile, the rug has this huge lump in the middle, right?
Yep. So that is one of my biggest frustrations, that I face on a regular basis, actually.
Yeah, and what they don't realize, Carrie, is by not talking about it is also making a decision, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that I was saying, so to use the 2009 decisions as an instance, I have a ton of, I've been here 7 years. I've had a number of kids go through confirmation, high school youth group, all of that, go out. In the meantime, as they're coming into themselves, making realizations about, they will not walk back through this door because they know. And they don't want to be the first, because the decision was, well, if somebody ever asks us if we will do a same gender wedding, then we'll deal with it. Mm-hmm. That's not the time to deal with it, friends. But anyway, I'm done talking.
Yeah. But so Carrie, my coaching question to you and to all of us, if you were in Carrie's shoes, what's one small step? Because sometimes we think, okay, we have to, host this large congregational discussion. And yes, that can be an end goal, but what's one small step that we can take? What's one thing that we can float? David, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I was just always unmuted, but
oh, sorry.
One of the things that I've found really helpful is just being really intentional about the examples that I use in newsletter articles or in sermons. Disproportionately naming and highlighting the stories of folks who are outside of the dominant culture.
Yeah.
Can I bring my sass back into the space? I'm just thinking, if we're claiming to be Christians, Jesus never really talked about anything either, so that's a good example.
That's what I was thinking. What would Jesus do? Confront.
Right? Exactly.
Jesus never pissed anybody off.
No.
And we talked a little bit about kind of leaning on, since one of the obstacles that we encounter is that people are afraid to say something unpopular or say the wrong thing or, get canceled or whatever. And so leaning on like issues that Jesus did talk about, that there are ELCA social statements about, and sort of using those resources that we do have that are our lane, and sort of addressing if those are issues that are coming up on the ballot, or even if they aren't, just getting kind of here are some things to be thinking and talking about, and here are some resources. If you feel like you don't have an informed opinion about this, let's get informed about this. And I'm really comfortable with that. I'm extremely outspoken. My congregation is hilarious that they called me to serve them. Sometimes I think, and so I think it's fun, but also it's scary. And so giving people a space where it's like, I will correct someone if they say something like very out of pocket. But sort of, this is a place to like say and ask, and be safe and brave, right? And using those ELCA resources is a really helpful kind of thing to start with.
As Pastor Casey was talking, it made me think, though, that people, before they can be brave and feel safe, like, how do we come together and know that our common goal is to be loved? I mean, what is the deepest sense of all of this? I think we kind of talked about that in our group. It's like everybody wants to be loved. Everybody wants to belong. Everybody wants to be respected. And how can we say those? I mean, because Jesus, he was like, I'm here. I'm God in flesh, and you are loved and you are accepted. But then in that creates the safety of knowing that you are valued and you are loved here. Quoting Miss Jill.
Thank you, Melissa. And John, if you are speaking, you're still muted.
My suspicion is that in most congregations that are split, there is a dominant group and there's a subgroup. And I think one way of opening things up is to have someone from the dominant group who knows a person who disagrees with their position to start a conversation where they encourage that person to express what they think and for them to experience on a one-on-one basis that they're accepted, having expressed to this dominant person what they really believe. And then that can lead to a small group discussion where people discover, yes, we can say what we believe without being put down or excluded. And eventually the congregation has to understand that the problem we're dealing with is a societal problem that's very damaging to our society. And can we be a space where people can come from the outside and address their perspective on certain issues without arguing, but simply to clarify for each other why we believe what we believe and how we understand what you believe, so that people can correct each other and hear each other. And that's a community, that's a witness to the wider community that I think is very much needed. And our church is one of the few places, as David suggested, where that might happen.
Yeah, amen, John. And that really is a positive challenge for us as faith communities. How do we create a crucible where there is that sense of safety, as much as we can co-create that together in expressing how we understand something, how we hear or believe something, and also receive those things from another, recognizing that listening to understand is distinctly different than agreeing with someone. And friends, that is, for me, that's the crux, is how do we preach that? How do we preach?
100%.
Yeah, Persida, please.
I'm following on what you said. I said that I feel that sometimes we don't listen to each other because we get defensive. And I think that we need to, when we're trying to see somebody else's view, we really need to stop and just really be present in the conversation and listen to the other person so we could understand. Because I think that when we don't do it that way, we lose a lot. You know, I have to admit that I've learned a lot from talking to people that are different than me. It's made me a better person, understanding to where they're from and what they're doing. You know, it's like I was having a conversation with someone when I was doing immigration work, and this person was like, no, they're illegals, they don't belong here, blah blah, you know, the whole gamut. I just listened, and then I listened, and I just listened to that person, and I just finally was able to understand, because she had fear that having these people come was going to create a problem, you know. And so I just said, you know, I think that when we sit and listen to someone's story, then we will understand the reasons why they're coming. So I encourage you to talk to an immigrant. And once you listen to their story, you will get some understanding of why they're coming here. And when that person did that, she had a total different understanding now. Yes, she feels, yes, they're still illegal according to her, but she understands now the reasons why they're coming, you know. And I think that's what we need to do, listen to each other's story.
Persida, thank you so much for your testimony and planting those seeds, because that's another aspect to what David has talked with us about today, is that we have the capacity as courageous leaders of planting those seeds of the possibility of our thinking evolving, right? And if people hammer, it's clearly stated in the Bible that it says such and such, let's look at how some of our traditions have evolved over time, and as our understanding of of scripture has evolved over time and how that's impacted how we are in relationship with one another and with God.
And I think that's a critical question that we need to ask people after we ask them to clarify their political conviction or their economic conviction, and then we ask them, explain to me how that relates to your faith. That can be a very critical question, and I think that's where when people finally realize there's a tension within them. It's not between us, the other person, and them. It's within them that there's a tension that they need to deal with, and that occurs when we ask them, relate that to your faith.
Amen. So with that, friends, I would like to give another hearty thank you to Pastor David Hively for preparing this for us today. It's the first of many conversations. I'm putting him on the spot by saying, I think he committed. Jason, isn't this right? Didn't David commit to several conversations like this, helping us lead up to
Absolutely. As a pastor and a parent, he has tons of time.
He has tons of time, tons of time. Friends, we're going to revisit this because this is not going away. The last thing I will say before we hit the hour is that in 2020, and I believe I have said this before in this space, I was starting to take one suicidal ideation call a week from leaders across the country. It makes the tears come back to my throat every time I remember that time. Friends, it's scary. We have the opportunity to see this coming. Let's learn together. Let's walk with one another. Let's love each other through it. Okay? Committed? Got it? Friends, you are seen, you are valued, you are loved. Come back next week. We're going to be here for breakout rooms by topics. With the new topics that we have, we've evolved. It can happen. These Lutherans hosting Courageous Leadership Space, we've evolved. Friends, I love you. Goodbye. Got to go teach a class.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, John. Bye now.